Today is Thursday, August 6, 2005, and my name is Sean Raines. I'm a seasonal interpretive ranger at Cedars of Lebanon State Park, and we're in cabin number 11. This morning, I am speaking with Mr. Ware Ricketts, son of May Ricketts, who worked at Cedars of Lebanon from 1938 to 1948. Mrs. Ricketts was first hired by the WPA as a recreation leader here at the park, and then later became secretary and park hostess and was a state employee here.
Automobile transportation took over. The little village was just fading away. My family had lived there from the beginning. They were in business down there. The Depression pretty well wiped things out, and then at that particular point, I don't need to go into a lot of detail on that, but the family had really, like so many at that point, really fallen upon hard times, as we used to say. So when the WPA gave my mother the job in Clifton, it was sort of a stopgap measure. My dad was in the hospital in Memphis, and so effectively family income had come to an end. And if I remember at that time, I think that paid her something like $40 a month. I've never really been sure. I try to go on memory from what she told me, but that was a lot of money in 1936, 37. And most little counties around the area had a recreational director. Some of her very good friends, and I'll mention them later, were the directors in Watertown, in Murfreesboro, in Lebanon. And the program was directed by a Miss Lavinia Tennant out of Nashville. And through the programs that were underway as a part of the New Deal, the development of the parks was a new program for Tennessee, and the government was going to cede, give, or transfer the land that they had acquired under all the New Deal programs to the states if they would set up a state park system. So the opportunity to work as a recreational director in the park system was offered to my mother then as a 3-month appointment in the summer of 1938.
And that's in Clifton, right?
From Clifton.
From Clifton.
To come here.
To come to Cedars.
To come to Cedars.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about that job, as I look back, Buddy found for me the original WPA papers appointing my mother, and her appointment was $70 a month, which was an absolute bonanza for us because one, it doubled her salary, two, it enabled her to start paying off the hospital bills that had accumulated for my dad. And it was an opportunity to leave Clifton, which, while it was our home, I don't think had ever really been her favorite place, although I grew up there from the time I was born, and it was the family's home. So in June of 38, when we came here, the appointment also included living quarters. There was no place to live. This a lot is based on what she told me later, because I certainly didn't know all this at the age of 10. But the rock cabin up here was being used by the government people as their office for the development of the park. This was in 38.
First cabin on the left, cabin 10. Okay.
And the rock cabin down there was being used by the federal administrator, who was Mr. Permenter.
E.S. Permenter. Yes.
The two log cabins had been occupied by Andrew Juergens and Eddie Jelly. They were the two engineers that were supervising these, but Eddie had already left and gone, I think, to Standing Stone. I'm not clear on that, but this cabin was identified as the place where we would live, but the superintendent, who was Walter Johnson, didn't have a home to live in until Mr. Permenter left. So he took this cabin. And so we got here and discovered that where we had planned to stay wasn't available. And the only thing that they could come up with at the time was the attic of the lodge. Now, I don't know if you've ever pulled that drop-down stair down that's in that little hall between the old kitchen and the restrooms, but the lodges had a lot of remodeling too, to give you its history. But it was a brand new building then, having been finished in '37. And the drop-down stair gave access to that storage attic, which was over the restrooms and what's now the storage room and office. But that was really a very full functioning kitchen built into the lodge. It had stove, refrigerator, sink, cabins, and it was used as a common kitchen for the summer help, the lifeguards, who, hard to believe today, but they lived in a little tiny room that's still down there in the nature center.
Wow.
Double-deck bunks. And there was a filter building there, which has been torn down, which ran the water system, because our water came from the cave at that point. So until Mr. Pimentor was due to be reassigned, eventually he went to a park in Kentucky. Why, Mr. Johnson and his wife Annette would live here, and they would move into that cabin. And since it was only for the summer, because this at that time was a 3-month assignment, and we were going to go back to Clifton in the fall, we would live in the lodge in the attic. And I just regarded this as a great adventure.
Yeah.
We put two, if you remember these old, not folding cots, but these old army cots that you literally put together with a canvas bed with 2 army cots, a couple of chairs, and that was home. Of course, we had no trouble with the kitchen for preparing our food, and sanitary facilities were available on the first floor there, and no showers down at the bathhouse.
So you lived upstairs, upstairs at the Cedar Forest Lodge for a time.
For that whole summer.
For the whole summer of '38.
When fall came and we would have returned to Clifton, they then renegotiated the terms. I think at that time there was some red tape associated with the way the WPA worked. You could only have a 3-month appointment. So and at that point, my mother accepted another 3-month appointment. She was still working for the WPA at that time. And I had just, lived the summer in the park. Great place for a 10-year-old on my own.
Great adventure, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean,
had the swimming pool. Had plenty of people to look after me because the lifeguards looked after me, the rangers looked after me, and I was exploring everything, and it was an adventure. When fall came, and we were going to stay longer. So where am I going?
Your 3-month was up. The first 3 months was up, and then
we were going to stay another 3 months,
right?
Which would take us to the end of the year. But my dad at that point, I think he was out of the hospital, but he was and back in Clifton. But the point being that we stayed here, and I started to school over at Major School. That's no longer there. The lot is there. It's overgrown with cedar trees.
There's a building over there.
There was a building back in there. I think it's torn down. It might be back behind the cedars, but anyway, it was a mile over there. I used to walk from the park over to Clarence Ingram's house, which is that farm's been acquired. It's the area behind Jackson Cave.
Right, the new land that park just acquired. Okay.
And then there were Aubrey and Richard, and I don't know how many kids there were, but anyway, I would join them, and we would all
walk over.
When the weather was good, we would walk the rest of the way over to Major. The weather was bad. He had an old A model. He put us all in the A model and drive us over to the highway. And I won't say that was my best adventure when we first came here, because as a kid from the urban environment of Clifton, even though it was a little village. I had no idea what a country school was like. It was at that time a little two-teacher school. And it had 8 grades. I was in the 6th grade. Sometime in that next 3 years, it became a 3-teacher school. And one of the teachers is still living, Miss Elowen Reed, who lives out there at the entrance to the park.
It's Ella Reed?
Elowen Reed. She was Elowen Majors.
Okay.
She's 93. She'll be 94 now.
Mm-hmm.
She might be very interesting to talk to. Her father was Towel Majors, and they had the old house across the street there from the school.
From the school, okay.
But that was my first introduction to what really amounted to the local population, because when we came here, as you may have discovered from your work on the acquisition of the land, Cedar Forest, as everyone called it,
mm-hmm.
it was when the state took over and made it the park that they decided it would be more elegant to call it Cedars of Lebanon State Park. But Wilson County Cedar Forest was not a popular venture. A lot of the people felt that the land had been taken over by the government, and while it was supposed to have helped them under the RFC program and all of you know about all
the
of
resettlement
that.
program. That's one thing. So there was a lot of people who were affected. People who were moved from the land didn't like that.
And they didn't realize what they were really getting obligated for, and a lot of them didn't feel that they really were given very good land and so on. But there was a lot of resentment about the park,
mm-hmm.
and there used to be some rather unpleasant incidents of people getting even with the government, as they used to call it,
mm-hmm.
by vandalizing the park, setting fires in the forest area. And there was still a lot of work going on at that point, clearing the old houses, and a lot of the people objected to that. It wasn't necessarily, I didn't know all of this at the time, but I did know that people did not really accept strangers coming into Cedar Forest with open arms, and we were not popular. But one of the tasks assigned to my mother when she came here was to do PR work for the park by going to the local civic organizations in Lebanon and Murfreesboro and Carthage, all these little county seats, Waterden, present the options for recreational opportunities at the program, encourage the clubs to bring their families out here,
mm-hmm.
to have meetings out here. She worked with the local home demonstration club, which was another program that was set up under the New Deal through the county agent to help the local people improve their standard of living. The local major demonstration club became very popular here as a group of people who used the park for their meetings, which came later.
So she worked with the people who live near the park, those
now,
affected by. Okay.
The real problem, if you've lived in Tennessee long enough to know that this is the belt, the Bible Belt, and we are the buckle in effect. And we were open on Sunday. We had the swimming pool running on Sunday. We had the lodge open on Sunday. We had a Nickelodeon at the lodge with records that played music so people could dance. We had the Saturday night square dances here, and they were very popular with people as far as the square dancing went, but we stopped at midnight on Saturday, and from the viewpoint of the local people, we shouldn't have opened again until Monday. But the difficulty of a 10-year-old understanding why there was resentment boiled down to the fact that I went to major school and I represented things that these children had all heard were terrible, because the park was the topic of Sunday sermons. And my parents were separated, and that was a difficulty for a lot of people back in the 30s. And one of the, I'll tell you this incident only because now that I'm a much older person, I've learned to live with it. But the first week or two at major school, I should have gone in overalls and a plaid shirt, and I had on short pants. And during one of the recesses, the older girls took me over the fence and pantsed me. That was quite a common initiation for young kids back in those days. It means they took your pants and ran off with them, which was a trauma for a 10-year-old.
So you stood out like a sore thumb, basically.
Yes,
You're not from here. And
I was not local.
Yeah.
But one of my buddies, who really became a very good friend, was Dick Huddleston's younger brother, Henry, was one grade behind me. And I had met Henry during the summer. He knew me, and I think he probably was the only student over there that I did know when I went to school. But he retrieved my pants and brought them to me so that I could go back into the room. And the teacher must have known what happened. It was Pauline Hunt was the teacher at that time, who did not embarrass me by asking me why I was late coming back from the recess. But that's just advice. It has nothing to do with the part.
Who was your teacher? I'm sorry.
Pauline Hunt.
Pauline Hunt.
Pauline
Okay.
Hunt.
So
She eventually became the principal when it became 3 teachers. Miss Eloise Reed came and taught the 5th and 6th grades, 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. She taught the 7th and 8th, and the lady who taught the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, I believe, was Addie Bascom. I don't remember for sure.
Ella Bascom?
I think it was Addie Bascom.
Oh, Eddie?
Addie. A-D.
Addie. Okay.
I believe that's her name. Those records would be available in the county education system. But within maybe the first few weeks after that trauma, I learned to accept the fact that, well, the first thing that we did, Dick Huddleston told Ricketts, my mother, you got to take this boy into town and get him some long pants. So we went to Lebanon and I bought some jeans. And I learned to fit into the environment over at major school. And survived the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades there. But when we finally reached high school, we were bused into Lebanon.
Okay.
And if I have pleasant memories of growing up here, they really started when I became a freshman in Lebanon High School, because that, through the summer activities, I already knew a lot of the students that were in the high school. And as an urban child, I really had more in common with kids from town than I did the farm children to begin with. So Lebanon High School became a very good memory for me.
And you knew some people, some of your classmates from major school went to Lebanon.
There were only 8 of us in that grade, and about 4 of us went to Lebanon High School. Some went to Walter Hill, and then another one of the Rangers here, Earl Sloan.
Earl Sloan, yes.
And he has children still living here that you may want to talk to. Ralph was one of his sons. Do you know Ralph Sloan was Ralph Sloan square dancers on the Opry for many years. He's dead now.
Okay.
Ralph was the oldest boy. And Ralph went to No-Ring, which had a school in those days. And Mrs. Sloan taught music over there. But Ralph and he eventually came to Lebanon High School for his last 2 years. No-Ring had a high school. Ralph and I were also classmates. And his youngest brother still lives in Lebanon, Melvin. I've looked him up since I moved back down here. Melvin Sloan. He has in with the Opry people. He's into music. Is almost.
I've heard of Melvin. Yeah.
But at any rate, and then some of his sisters. When we had about 2 years ago, Buddy did a WPA days out here, and Nelda came out, and one of the other sisters, Bobby, and he also had at that time an interview that he'd had with Mrs. Sloan. She just died she lived to be 96 or something.
Oh.
She just died, since I've been back here.
The teacher the music teacher,
she
right?
taught music over and over. Yeah. At any rate, they lived in one of the arrangement here at the park at that time, since there were only these 4 cabins, the lodge and the bathhouse. Some of the houses that had not been torn down, that were in better shape, that were scattered around within the forest area, were used by various rangers as homes. The Sloans lived in one that was up there on Burnhouse Road, and the Howards lived on one that was across the way. And there was one way out there in the woods, and I've wondered if it's still standing. Buck Allison, you may have run across his name later, as he eventually became the director. Buck and Camille came here in '39, I think, because I think they came that first summer.
Okay.
And they lived out there in that cabin. But the development of the park in '38, of course, was brand new. Everybody just beginning to understand what a state park would be, including, I think there were only 7 in that original group. Cedars, Chickasaw, Natchez, Standing Stone, and so on. So, as the federal people left, which was the Pimentos and the Jurgens at the time we lived here, then sometime in the fall of '38 or the spring of '39, because we lived in the lodge until the spring of '39.
Spring of '39, okay.
Walter moved into the superintendent's house, and that's when they remodeled it and added the kitchen and dining room. It was originally the same plan as this other little stone house, and added the extra bedroom.
Okay.
And then when this became available, we moved here, which finally, and that was in the spring of '39.
Spring of '39, you're here then.
We had a house.
Okay.
And at that time, the state hired my mother as the recreational director and administrative secretary for the park.
Okay.
So that she had a permanent job. And of course, in '39, the country was not really fully recovered from the Depression, but things were getting better because we were tooling up for the military activity. I didn't know this either at the time, but as the war in Europe was starting, there were obviously people who understood that we were going to have to provide at least support for the European combatants. But in '39, well, let's see, where am I in the history?
'39, yeah. I think you said the spring of '39.
Spring of '39. That summer was...
You're living in here now, in this
repeat,
cabin,
really,
cabin 11.
A really repeat of the previous summer. Lots of people, lots of activity. And that went on really into the 40s. Because...
So your mother, if I can interject real quick.
Yeah.
So your mother started, now when she first got hired from Clifton here, she was the was the recreation leader?
She was called the recreation leader with the WPA.
With the WPA, okay.
And
was she working? What was she doing in Clifton?
She was doing the same thing
for
the WPA. She was organizing activities for the children.
Okay.
We lived across the street from the school in Clifton, and the school grounds in the summer. She'd put a shuffleboard on the school sidewalk. She had obtained table tennis tables to put in the auditorium, and they had craft classes and things like that.
Okay.
What had she done beforehand that qualified her to do that? Nothing. She was a music teacher.
Okay. in the Clifton school system, or?
And she had gone to Clifton. No,
Okay.
she taught in the Clifton school system, but she taught music privately.
Mm-hmm.
She was a classical pianist, and a little bit of a background there, just an isolated family as a joke. Country music is the way to go in Tennessee. Classical music, questionable taste. I wanted to learn to play the guitar because we had the square dances, and Mr. Julius Robinson played the fiddle, and we had a couple of brothers from Lebanon who played the guitar and the banjo, and the thing to do was learn to play guitar. And I remember when I asked her, because she tried to teach me to play the piano, and I didn't like to practice, so I didn't do too well at that. She says, "No son of mine is going to be a country picker."
Mm-hmm.
And I've told her that many years later. I says, "If you had just let me learn to play the guitar, look where I would be today with the Grand Ole Opry." But that's aside.
So she didn't let. Yeah. Okay.
It has nothing to do with the park. Excuse me if I digress.
Oh, that's okay.
Sean. I'm apt to wander off.
That's fine. I can. That's fine.
Yeah.
Now in Clifton, why, if you don't mind me asking, can you tell me why she went to the work for the WPA in Clifton? Was there?
When the WPA programs were established, I don't know how people were selected within the different communities to work for the WPA, but essentially the women who were selected to work as recreational directors were people within the community who had some respect from the local establishment, probably were recommended because within this area here, Mrs. Annie Burkett was the recreational director in Watertown, and subsequently 2 of her boys worked here several summers, and the 3rd son worked here part-time. Miss Kate Watson in Lebanon was the recreational leader for the Lebanon community.
Okay.
Mary Knox was the recreational leader for Murfreesboro. And I think she was a librarian in the Murfreesboro school system. But there were a lot of different programs. Of course, the workers who put together the lodge and who built the cabins here and the picnic shelter and everything were also WPA employees because the government was into construction and not as it affected this part directly, but I know that another one of the very much documented WPA programs was their employment of artists to go around and paint murals on the construction. And I know that in my earlier youth in Clifton, a showboat came to Clifton on the river that was a part of that WPA program to hire unemployed theater people. And they had put together a cruise, and they went down the river stopping at all the little towns and producing showboat productions.
Okay.
So there were a lot of different aspects to the WPA, but how she was selected is probably because within the Clifton community she was respected as a leader of the community.
The community.
She had always been very active with the young people in Clifton, and probably, I don't want to say ahead of her time, but I do remember as a child, there's nothing in these little towns for people to do, and she always opened up our house there for young people to come and play games. My brother and sister were older than I by some years. I was the babe, but they used to bring the jukebox from the cafe downtown when it closed and put it on our front porch, and everybody came out there to dance.
Oh, okay.
It was just known that you could come to the Ricketts house, and it was a party place. So somehow or other, with that reputation, Miss Tennant
Lavinia Tennant?
Lavinia Tennant.
Lavinia Tennant, sorry.
Lavinia Tennant.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, she eventually married Mike Garvin, and I think she's dead now. They lived in Nashville, but she was the director for the state administrator, or what have you, for this program, Middle Tennessee.
For the Middle Tennessee, the Park Development Program,
The
right?
Development
Okay.
Program. And she worked in conjunction with the park people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, in answer to your question, how she was picked by the WPA, and then of course being tapped to come here was because it was an opportunity that might have been offered to several people, but from a personal standpoint, it was a salvation for our family. Because could I get some water?
Yes, I want to.
Yeah.
Yes, and I was just going to offer that to you. Let me find.
I can drink out of the bottle.
I had them. Where did I brought them down in my. Oh, there they are. Okay, yeah. I'd forgotten where they are.
Yeah. What I was going to say, without meaning to get into family history too much, but obviously with a sick father and a 10-year-old child that needed to be clothed and educated, she needed to get a job that paid more than teaching a few students piano 2 times a week.
Okay. And your dad, real quickly, what did he do?
My father was in business with his father. They had what we call a general store in Clifton. And just briefly, that business had done very well up to the time of the Depression. The family had lived really quite comfortably for that time. But my grandfather died in '37. And as the Depression had become really very severe in the 30s, people were not buying the merchandise. We lived well enough, as I remember, and I've gotten this from later reminiscence with my dad, but a lot of the merchandise was accepted on consignment in those days. You sold it and you paid it. But Dad was trading with the local people for food or services. We always had, my sister and I have laughed about this, we always had plenty to eat because Dad would bring home ham, sausage, chickens, eggs, vegetables, which he had traded merchandise at the store to one of the local farmers for.
Okay.
But that merchandise ultimately had to be paid for. And if you didn't have any money coming in, the warehouse suppliers from Louisville and Nashville, what have you, had to have payment. So he had to close the business, probably under what today would be considered bankruptcy conditions. But in addition to all of that and the distress over his father's death and what have you, he probably had what today we would call a nervous breakdown.
Oh, okay.
But
so his father owned the store.
Owned the store.
Family business, basically.
Family business.
Okay, I see. Okay. And then your mother, basically needed work.
And
your family
we put him in the
income.
hospital. I know he was put in the hospital in Memphis for both physical and probably mental rehabilitation. And he was over there at the time we came here. And
okay, so yeah, so you and your mom basically came here. Now, did you have any brothers and sisters come here?
Yeah,
or
not
at
that time.
Okay.
My sister, who is the oldest child, she's 14 years older than I am. An uncle had come to the rescue, and he took her he worked in Washington. He took her to Washington and put her in GW, George Washington University.
GW? Oh, wow. Okay. Good school.
To help with her. And my brother, in the meantime, was 9 years older than I, had been working in Columbia as a construction job, and he was somehow or other, he was painting a building. He fell off the scaffolding and broke his leg, and apparently through whatever the repercussions from that were, the settlement they gave him enabled him to go to Memphis, and he studied basic electricity at what I don't remember the name of the school in Memphis any longer, but he had gone to work also then in Washington as he is a certified electrician, tradesman. He had gone to Washington to live with my uncle and his sister, and he was working in Washington. Family sidelight there, just of no interest for the park history, but if you're familiar with Washington and the National Cathedral, at that time they were doing the wiring in the apse, and he did the wiring in the National Cathedral over the choir area back to the main altar as one of the workers.
It's one of the things he did. Okay. So just basically it was you and your mom here.
But it was just us.
Okay. And she came as a WPA employee to work here at Cedars.
Worked here for 3 months.
For
was
3 months.
renewed for 3 months through the winter. See, that would be probably, because I think it was 39 that the records show that the state of Tennessee hired her.
Let me see.
In fact, Buddy showed me an interesting letter. Walter Johnson was transferred to Natchez Trace as the superintendent.
I've read up a little bit on it, yes.
He wrote a letter requesting that she be transferred with him because he had become very dependent on her help administratively. She found an area that she seemed really to enjoy. I think, for a woman at that point, and I think she was 49, she was finding a whole world, a career, as a
Was she like a park secretary too?
Secretary.
So she kind of doubled under Mr. Johnson. She worked under him.
Secretary, and she didn't really. She told me later. She said she really didn't want to go to Natchez Trace because she had become very comfortable here at Cedars, and she had become very good friends with many of the people in the area.
Right.
Mrs. Burkett was a very good friend of hers. They were lifelong friends, and she didn't want to continue to work with Mr. Johnson because he would push more off on her, according to her. And the superintendent who replaced him, Louis Anderson, really became a surrogate father for me from that time until he went into the service and when he came back again. Of all the people that we knew here at the park, over the years, I probably am fondest of Dick Huddleston and Louis Anderson as the two people that fill that void, left when I didn't have a father.
Right. Yeah, and Mr. Johnson, I looked at some of the correspondence, it sounded like they had a really good working relationship.
They had a good working relationship, and she also had a good working relationship with Mr. Anderson. And then when Mr. Anderson went into, he was a reserve officer. The war came, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but after Pearl Harbor in 41, I think in 42, he was called to active duty. And Emmett Guy came. Now, Emmett had been at Chickasaw, and Emmett and Camille were here through the early books. I don't think Emmett was ever called into the service. Emmett and Camille were here in the 40s. Probably, and maybe he was, or maybe he had to go somewhere else, because somewhere in the latter part of that period, before the war ended in 45, Mr. Julius Robinson was made the acting superintendent. He had been one of the rangers.
Okay.
He became very sick. He had the measles.
Oh.
As an adult. And he really never recovered from that.
Oh,
and
really? Wow.
After that, I think Dick was offered the job as acting superintendent, and there was a lot of politics involved over whether he would be a full-fledged superintendent or an acting superintendent. But he did not want that job.
He was the forest ranger.
He was the forest
He wanted
ranger.
to stay there.
He wanted to stay there, and he stayed there all 36 years that he worked here. But, so they offered her the job as acting superintendent, and it was about 44.
Oh, your mom?
My mom.
Yeah?
And she fulfill that function until Mr. Anderson came back from the service after the war ended in '45.
Okay.
Then reverted back to recreational director and administrative secretary.
So she was head honcho for a little while here.
For a period of time, she was really, as the people say, she was the superintendent. It was always a bitter point in her memories. She worked for the park until she was 75. I'll cover that real quick here. After we left here, she went to Standing Stone. After Standing Stone, she had become so adept at organizing the administrative side of the work at the park and also knowing how the parks functioned that she became what they called a troubleshooter, and she went from Standing Stone to Cove Lake. She went to set up the procedures down at Harrison Bay and Bell when they were acquired and set up as new. She did the organization of the staff at Paris Landing and Warriors Path. I was gone by then, but I remember where she was always moving because she was willing to take her suitcase, go live in the park, and stay there for several months and get everybody set up so that the park office in Nashville used her as a troubleshooter. Then when she wasn't doing that, she would come back and work in the office in Nashville.
In Nashville, in the state parks office?
At the state park system,
okay.
Yeah, at them. And Mr. Elam in Lebanon had the concession. He provided the old nags that were rented out to the public. And they weren't nice horses. They were has-been. But for rental to the public, you don't want a good horse, so they're running. He made a deal with me that if I would clean the stalls, I could ride anytime I wanted to. And it did two things. It exercised the horses during the week because they usually were only rented out on the weekend. And secondly, I got a chance to explore every trail and road in this area. By then I was probably 12 or 13. I was not 10. But Cedar Forest Road, the pavement ended at the lodge when you came off of the highway.
Okay.
The Tool Shed Road was a dirt trail, very much like what's left of Cedar Forest Road is now, where it leaves Snow Ring Road and goes over to Simmons Bluff. That was not Cedar Forest Road, that was Rattlesnake Trail. Cedar Forest Road came out at No Ring.
Okay.
And when I first bought that place out there, I told people I was living on Cedar Forest Road. Then I found out my address was No Ring Road.
Oh,
but
okay.
It
changed since then.
But it was all very primitive, one-lane gravel roads that they got the county grader out and sort of repaired every spring after the winter wash had rutted them up. And you could go anywhere though on horseback.
Right.
And they also still maintain some of the fire trails. Now the group camp is at the end of one of the early fire trails. They went over to the Howard House. And group camp was built in 50-something, I think. It's not over. And the new cabins were built, I think, in the 60s, and the campground was put in at that time. But all of those things, of course, have been done after
your time here. So the
here.
campground where it's at now was after you'd left.
After
the 60s.
Okay. I'm sure it was in the 60s.
Did they have camping here when you were here at all?
We allowed camping, tent camping.
Tent camping.
And scouts, that's another. The scouts still come here for their jamborees. The scouts
jamborees.
Camp.
Yeah.
And during the war, of course, one of the big activities here in the whole area was the Army maneuvers from about 43, 44, getting ready for the European campaign. The Army was headquartered at Cumberland in Lebanon. We became the most popular weekend stop between exercises. The way the Army maneuvers ran, they would have a specific exercise for the troops during the week, and then they would all have a break on the weekend, and they would find some place to camp. And if they were at all close to Cedars, we were popular because, one, we'd open the swimming pool for them.
Sure.
And open the lodge.
Mm-hmm.
And every girl that could figure out a way to get here on the weekend would come out and dance with the soldiers all weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the interesting sidelight. Since we'd opened the pool, they would skinny dip in the pool, so we would have to put someone between the lodge and the pool to make sure that the people didn't go down to the swimming pool area.
Oh, to catch them.
Because
Catch them.
the soldiers were all swimming there without any suits, and there were adventurous young ladies who would have liked nothing better than to go down there and see what was going on.
So the soldiers were among themselves
But
skinny dipping, and
skinny
you try to
dipping.
keep the ladies from going over
The
there.
ladies going down there, they would keep them up at the lodge, but they would pitch their tents in what's the recreational area now, and they would pitch their tents in the open fields that were up there going towards the group camp.
Oh, the army tents,
The
you
army
mean?
tents.
That they'd pitch them on the baseball field area? Okay.
And sometimes they would come back up this way
Mm-hmm.
and camp in the Ingram field behind the picnic area.
Okay.
But the idea was to be close to the park.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about Ware Ricketts for a minute now. I got to remember this
Sure.
because after the maneuvers were over with, the Army sent some reps in here to negotiate reparations to the farmers for damage done by the maneuvers. And the stone cabin and that other log cabin were both rented to military Judge Advocate General lawyers, became good friends of ours.
Mm-hmm. So the cabin just up here, the
Yeah,
first
here.
stone, and then the
Yeah.
one over, not yours.
Yeah, Dick Huff lived up there, and
With the other log
the
cabin.
other log cabin,
Mhm.
yeah. That log cabin had been, those two cabins had been rented at a certain period of time here. We lived here, the superintendent lived in the stone cabin. When the government left, those two cabins became rentals. And they were very popular for a group from either Lebanon or Murfreesboro or Gallatin with a chaperone to come out and rent. The girls from Lebanon, the girls from Watertown, from Murfreesboro, from Gallatin would come rent for a week. And Miss Mary Knox would chaperone the group from Murfreesboro, Miss Burkett from Watertown, Miss Watson from, I forget the name of the lady from Gallatin. But of course, the great thing for us as summer employees was that after you finally finished your job, we all got together at the lodge, put money in the jukebox, and danced.
Mm-hmm.
And so summer social activities were popular.
Mm-hmm.
But during the war, those, as I said, the cabins were rented there, and they were negotiating for the damages done to the different tear down fences, the maneuvers, wreck the pastures, and so on. But in the wintertime, soldiers also got sick. And at one point, there was a bad flu epidemic of sorts, or some kind of an epidemic of the sorts, and the lodge was set up so that they had about 15 or 20 cots set up in there, and Ricketts sort of took over nursing the soldiers that couldn't go on in active duty. You know, they'd go on sick call and they would be put in there, and we had one young fellow that I remembered specifically. We were living here, broke his leg, and she volunteered to let him stay here with us until he could walk again. He was from New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
The background only incidental in that he regaled me with tales of skiing. Now, skiing for a southern boy is an unknown sport, but I was determined after that, and I can't remember his name, but I was determined to learn to ski, so I eventually did, and that became a great, when I was still physically able,
pastime.
a great activity.
Mm-hmm.
But I remembered that he was here for 3 or 4 weeks while his leg healed. And we just set up another cot here and took care of him.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Oh, in here? In your
his
cabin?
Okay.
Yeah.
So memories come back
Yeah.
that I hadn't even thought of in years as we were talking here.
Wow.
But the Army maneuvers for that 4 days period, I was a high school student at that point, because Lebanon High School, we discussed my attending Heights, but that was out of the question when it was.
Yes, yeah, you had went to high school in Lebanon.
I went to high school in Lebanon.
And then by that time you had gotten to know people and a lot more comfortable here and all that. And so, yeah, the maneuvers, were the maneuvers done in the pastures and the fields around here?
In several counties.
Okay, but
what we were told at the time, we knew that they were preparing for the campaign when they invaded Europe.
Yeah.
Middle Tennessee's geography was similar to Central Europe, so this was giving the soldiers experience in mounting campaigns, and I don't know how it was all planned out, but it wasn't just here. Mm-hmm. It was this entire area. Crossing rivers, they would put pontoons across the Cumberland. The tanks would be staged for a foray against the enemy, and they were always the Red and the Blue Army, and they bombed each other with flour sacks full of flour. And when they hit the ground, the flour. It's quite exciting.
Oh God, yeah.
Quite an interesting bit of adventure and yet we were going into high school every day.
Yeah.
Doing all the things that you do as a normal teenager, while this was going on all around.
Yeah, that would have been interesting. And they were doing that out here too, doing the mock battles.
Mock battles here in the park, mock battles in Carthage. The perimeter for the maneuvers really was about 5 counties. The headquarters was in the Cumberland University, but they covered Smith County, Rutherford County. They went down as far as Woodbury, I know, because when the Huffs were staying here, and he was going out, he had to go investigate each complaint that was filed with the Department of Defense over the damage, and he was going all over the county.
All over, okay.
That's how I know. So that tells me that there was a maneuver at one point that went that far. Okay. But of course, if you go east from here, you get into some really nice hill country over in Smith County, DeKalb County, and if you go up towards Gallatin and Hartsville, you've got plenty of experience in river warfare.
Yeah, river.
They didn't go too far east because Nashville probably didn't really want the Army messing up Davidson County.
Yeah.
I don't remember that the maneuvers went over as far as Franklin. They probably stayed this way.
Stayed here. Okay.
Rutherford.
That's one thing that we've been trying to find more information on the maneuvers around here. So that really helps out.
And it's just that the park was popular because of the activities that they had to camp somewhere every weekend. Okay. And if they camped, they would get a pass, to go into town. So on Saturday night, the USO was very active in Lebanon, Watertown, Murfreesboro. That's digressing for just a minute, and it has nothing to do with the park, but this is the Bible Belt. And in my youth, we were not allowed to dance on school property, so we couldn't have a prom as our junior-senior activity, whereas the Nashville students were far more sophisticated and they had great parties. And because Castle Heights and Ward Belmont were matched up as prep schools, they had fantastic social activities. But the USO managed to turn the gymnasium at Lebanon High School into a rec area for dancing every Saturday night during the Army maneuvers. So while I was in school, I think it was my senior year, junior year, we decided that we would petition the County Board of Education to allow us to use the gymnasium for a junior-senior prom, because if it was, and the high school girls were encouraged to come there on Saturday, because these were very closely chaperoned events.
Right.
The girls would come there to dance with the soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't have, we danced out here, and we used to have parties out here all the time where we could dance, but we couldn't have anything in school. And it was an activity.
Right.
Cut the story short, we petitioned the County Board of Education. They said we could. Then after we had permission to do this and we made all our elaborate plans to have our first junior-senior prom in the history of Lebanon High School, they rescinded their permission because one of the county board members decided that the original ruling about dancing being an immoral was correct.
Oh.
And this is a gentleman from Watertown.
Yeah.
Ware Ricketts graduates from Tech in 1950. He's looking for a job teaching English.
Uh-huh.
There's an opening at Watertown High School. I go to the interview, and I thought I had the job because I knew people in Watertown, and it was a cinch. I would be employed.
Easily, yeah.
This little man sitting there at the table looks at me across the way after about 15 minutes of questioning and answers of qualifications to teach school there, and he says, "Aren't you the young fellow who wanted to get rules about dancing on county property rescinded back a few years ago?" And I didn't get the job, and I'm sure it's because he remembered me as being a rabble-rouser from my high school years.
Oh, gee, yeah.
Because at that time, they still couldn't dance
Sure.
on school. Today, things are very different.
It's different,
but
right.
that era was a different era. That was in the 50s.
But the Army was able to get
But
that
the Army was
facility.
the USO was able to use the facility.
The gymnasium, right?
Mhm.
Right.
But the sororities and fraternities at Cumberland used to have their parties out here. Murfreesboro did not have Greeks then. I don't know whether they do now or not. They probably do. Murfreesboro was Middle Tennessee State College at
yes.
that point.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's the university. It's grown enormously.
It has.
The GI Bill was both good and bad. It enabled these universities, these schools to expand their capabilities by unbelievable curriculum,
Mhm.
and to offer advanced degrees and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they lost that ivory tower academic environment that they had when I went there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And more people, more students could
More
go
students.
coming back from the
Yeah.
school.
But how did you choose Murfreesboro, by the way?
I came down for the historic preservation
Yeah.
program over there at Middle State Tennessee State Teachers. Now it's MTSU,
Yeah.
the university there. So that's why I came down here for grad work.
Yeah.
They had a pretty good program there. So
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, that's
Well,
so
back to the park.
Yeah,
'cause
that's
I'm sorry,
fine. No problem.
I digressed there, but
no
I was
problem.
just saying.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that made the park a real mecca for young people that era, because it was a place where everybody could come together, and your clubs could have a party out here. They could have a picnic, and there was a facility that they could, the shelter up there could accommodate 50, 75 people. The lodge was always available.
Mhm.
They still have the activity center down there, but they don't even keep that open.
Not as much.
Unless you make plans ahead of time.
But it was kind of a neutral place where people could come and still dance without the
Play cards.
yeah
uh,
interact
and interact with people.
yeah.
Bridge clubs in Murfreesboro and Lebanon would come out here for an afternoon of bridge at the lodge during the week.
Hmm.
The ladies would all regard that as an opportunity to come here instead of being hosted in their home.
Mm-hmm.
And those were all a part of what was encouraged, really, as far as park usage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And your mom helped organize some of
She
this.
helped to organize that and
Mm-hmm.
push that.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the time that she was still working here, I remember her making comments to the fact that they don't keep the parks open like they used to. It's partly a matter of finances. You know,
Yeah.
you can't afford the staff because you have to have someone in the lodge the hours that it's open, or it'll be vandalized.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that means that it's like you have to keep the nature center open.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have someone down there.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm.
They concentrate on two things. They don't even keep a full-time campground attendant anymore.
No, well,
And-
no, we have, it's a volunteer campground host
Yeah.
who kind of watches over things, but no, you're right, there's no full-time.
They don't even, well, they got, my buddy that used to run, he lived there as the host.
Mhm.
You probably met him. Chuck, well, they discontinued that program.
Yep.
They don't have a host living there.
A host, right, right.
And I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But those were good programs, and they do have the Friends of Cedars that have the Saturday night music now, and that do 2 or 3 other things.
Mm-hmm.
I've met Ken and Herb, and they're active. They provide firewood and stuff. But there's so much more that can be done.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
we're digressing.
definitely.
You want history?
But yeah, on if I can backtrack a little bit, you mentioned you know, your mom was superintendent for a while, acting for a while, and then Mr. Robinson came back, I guess, and eventually Mr. Allison was he was a ranger here, right?
He
And
was the recreational.
he was trained by your mom.
He was trained by her.
Okay.
In recreation.
To be the
He came back. When he came back from the, he was in the Seabees. This was in 45, 46. He came here, and he came back as a recreational director.
Okay.
Was anxious to move on up the hierarchy, and
Right.
he got a job then as the superintendent at Montgomery Bell. That was a new park.
Uh-huh.
Newer park, because
Right.
Montgomery Bell wasn't part of the original 7.
Right. Right.
And at that time, Mr. Anderson was still here.
Mm-hmm.
And Buck moved from that job as superintendent at Montgomery Bell to, I don't know whether he went into the central office with
Mm-hmm.
a staff job or not, or whether he became a director. But as I said, he was a good politician, and those are appointed jobs. The Commissioner of Conservation and the Director of State Parks are all political appointees depending on who is in charge. And in those days, of course, they were all Democrats because the only way you could get anywhere in the state government. But today, it depends. The powers that be fluctuate between Republican and Democrat.
Right, whoever's in office is who gets appointed almost.
Gets to a point. And
Right.
While they have the civil service appointments that guarantee you a certain amount of job continuity, these administrative jobs are all political.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
as I said, he eventually became the director.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that he ever became the Commissioner of Conservation.
Mhm.
He may have.
Mm-hmm.
But I know he became the Director of State Parks
Okay.
in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
But Mr. Chappell is the one I remember just about the time. And from about 1950 on, I really don't remember much of anything.
Now, did Buck? Now you mentioned. Now your mom trained Buck.
Yeah.
Now, was Buck a little resentful of that being trained by a woman? I don't know.
Yeah, I suspect
was
there
that
was
something?
there
Okay.
because what we realized is that some years later, when the time came that she had to be moved from Cedars, it was Buck's initiative that did that. Though it was a good move, it was the best thing in the world to get her into a. She would have probably been happy to work here when she retired, but it was good that she moved on and assumed more responsibility by becoming a troubleshooter for the organization as the park system expanded.
He kind of transferred her out from here to Standing Stone, right?
To Standing Stone.
Right.
And then
okay.
from Standing Stone, she moved on to
Other
parks, and I just know that I would visit when she was in the parks, but I never lived in any of the other parks. And
Buck was a ranger. Buck was the rec leader here when she was transferred out.
When she was he was already in Nashville.
Oh, he was in
48. The superintendent here at that time. Let's see. After Mr. Anderson went to, he retired. He left the Park Service. Was it in 47? Your correspondence will show that.
Yeah.
Buck wrote a letter.
James Walkden was the park superintendent.
James Walkden, yes. Okay, Jim was hired here, and he eventually left and went with the National Park Service. I think he went to Wind Cave in North Dakota.
And I'm having here, Mr. Allison is advising Mr. Walkden of the transfer of your mom, junior rec leader, from Cedars to Standing Stone Park effective September 1st of 48.
Okay, 48. That's when we went to Standing Stone, yeah. Jim Walkden, I'd forgotten Jim. He came to work here as a ranger. He was one of the first formally trained rangers, I think, that the park had hired. Almost everybody working here was really sort of self-taught. Dick, of course, had come here, lived here, and was originally hired when it was under development. Mr. Sloan was a local person working here as a ranger.
Right.
Julius Robinson was local,
Yeah.
working here as a ranger. Odell Lanham. This is very much like the staff you have
Locals,
here now.
right? Yeah.
Buddy is local, and then you have your people who, I don't know what job title they have any longer,
Yeah.
but they are
It's a state title, Ranger 1, 2, and 3. It's kind of
ranger level,
personnel level. Yeah. So Walkden was here.
Walkden, I'd forgotten
was
Jim.
the-
Jim came.
Yeah.
At that time, I think maybe, was Emmett Guy back here? When was Emmett here?
I'm not sure.
With the records, we'll put this together. If you're trying to construct it on dates.
Yeah.
But Walkden was here, yes, in the 40s. But Jim left to go to work. He had applied for the National Park Service. And, of course, the civil service for the national appointment was far more rigid than for the state. But he was finally accepted, and he left. Louis Buck also worked here briefly before he went to the National Park Service. We had several of the young fellows who came through here. And at that stage, I wasn't really that... by then I was in college.
Yeah, you had other...
And I wasn't really planning to make a career out of the Park Service.
Right.
I've often thought, hindsight being very good, what a great career it would have been had I gone back to school and qualified in agronomy or something so I could work as a park ranger. But I didn't.
Yeah.
I had, either for whatever reasons, ambitions to go on out in the world and become something else besides a park ranger, and did. But that's not relevant to park history.
And your mom, now, was she disappointed about having to leave here? I mean, you all liked it here.
Sean. When we left, she was an adaptable person, as I think, looking back at the way she managed to handle life. So she probably didn't really want to go to Standing Stone. On the other hand, she may have very well been willing to live there as opposed to here, because she had lived here for 10 years and had become very comfortable here. And in the meantime, she and my dad had decided that they would remain separated, and he had gone to the West Coast to work and eventually went to Guam.
Okay.
And when he came back, there was never a question of them reconciling.
So he recovered from the hospital, from his hospitalization, and
the war came. He went to the West Coast. He worked for Kaiser Shipyards, and turned his mercantile experience into warehouse management, and managed the supplies for the shipyard in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, okay.
In the Bay.
out in California.
California.
Okay.
In fact, there's a sideline. I went to Boise State the summer of '44, I think, and that's the summer I did not work here at the park. Dad wanted me to come and live with him. I really didn't know the guy.
Out in California?
And he was living in Berkeley.
Berkeley, okay.
And life does strange things that, as you look back, have some impact. So I did go out and spend most of that summer in Berkeley. He lived on University Avenue right down by the school. And the plan was that I would live with him and go to UC Berkeley. Had that occurred, and I had been there post-World War II, I would have probably become one of the lead hippies in the California culture. But
so that was during 1944.
That was 44.
You were not here. You were out there.
I was there for that summer.
That summer of '44.
And when the question of my staying out there to go to school, they discussed it. I would have probably thought it was great, because I know I spent a lot of time at the UC campus with the idea that that's where I was going to go to school. She insisted that was... He, in the meantime, had accepted a job in the Navy to go to Guam.
Oh.
The real reason that I didn't stay in California was because I was not mature enough to live out there on my own.
So you would have had to live on your own to go to school there.
I had to go to school there. So I'm back here, and that's when I come back to Tennessee.
So fall of '44, you're back here,
and
your mom and dad decided to remain separated through the years.
He's in Guam, and I'm here.
Yeah.
And I start back here and finish high school in Lebanon.
Okay. And then after the war, your dad stayed out in California?
He stayed in California when he first came back from Guam, and then eventually, when he retired, he lived in Memphis.
Okay.
And
and then he and your mom just remained separated then?
They remained separated, and to everyone's amazement, when he became very ill with esophageal cancer in the last 2 years of his life. She was at that time, she was living in El Dorado. She said, well, he has to go somewhere so he can come back here. And so she took him in, and he lived the last 2 years there.
In El Dorado. So your mom, after retiring from state parks, moved out to California?
No, to Arkansas.
El Dorado, Arkansas.
El Dorado, Arkansas.
I'm sorry.
Well, this is, again, typical. When she retired from the parks in '75, my sister and I decided that she should not be living in Nashville alone at that age, how wrong we were. So we convinced her that she should sell the house in Nashville and move to El Dorado, where my sister lived. So we sold that house and bought a little house a block away from my sister, so that she would be close to family. I was moving around at that time as a corporate gypsy because I had been, and we didn't, and there was no family in Nashville any longer. Little did we know that she would live 25 years in El Dorado.
Wow. And she died in
101.
Wow.
And that's why, so she was living in El Dorado, and when Dad became ill, he was living in a residential hotel in Memphis. And we didn't realize how sick he really was, but she knew he was sick. Well, he can come stay here.
Okay.
No, he lived to be 81.
Okay.
I've got good chance of adding a few years if I can maintain good health.
Yeah. So your mom died about 2000, 2001
she died
or so?
in 90. Let's see, she's been dead. I'll tell you in a moment exactly when. She was 101.
Wow.
She died in 1991.
Okay. 101. That's
she
great.
was born in 89. 1889.
1889.
Yeah, she was 101.
Wow, that is amazing. And then she went to. Did she ever try to get transferred back to Cedars of Lebanon at any time, or was there ever any talk of
I don't
coming
think
back
she
here?
really,
Maybe?
after she had
Or-
once left here, I don't think there was,
That was it, yeah.
a discussion of that. She might have, but that was not a practical thing because,
Yeah.
let's see, who took over? She lived at Cumberland for a while. I visited her at Cumberland Mountain, and I'm trying to remember the name of the superintendent there. He was
Oh.
a very nice person.
Yeah, I don't have it in here. I think after Walkden was park superintendent, and then the next one was George Marlin, who was superintendent here.
George Marlin
After your
came
mom
here
left.
just before we left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, George Marlin had played football at Vanderbilt, if I remember correctly. That was his claim to fame. And I'm not sure how long he worked for the park.
Okay.
But the next superintendent that she worked with up at Cove Lake was Jim Robb, who took over Pickett.
Okay.
But Jim Robb was another veteran who had come back to the Park Service after the war. And I forget, Jim, I think, had been at Pickett before the war. At any rate, he was a real outdoorsman. And he liked, have you been to Pickett?
I haven't.
It
no.
was the most rural of the parks originally. It
That's
was
out west,
up
right?
in Fentress at
Yeah.
Jamestown.
Okay.
Very pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, George Marlin, I forget. Some of these names you mentioned them, and then they come back. Marlin,
Yeah.
And I think Marlin was the superintendent when we left here.
Okay. And you said she was pretty much.
Trying to
sorry.
remember the name of the superintendent at Standing Stone. He was a young fellow from Livingston.
And I think the director of state parks closed. Buck Allison, you said mentioned was for a while, but there's also an S.C. Taylor,
Yeah,
who was a
Taylor.
director at for some point at some
Somewhere
point too.
in there.
Yeah.
And these are all people that I don't really. The director
Right.
that I remember, of course, was Bill Hay.
Bill Hay. Yes.
He was the director when we were new here.
first started.
He was
right.
the first director of state parks, I think. And he married a young lady from Lebanon. In fact, he's buried in the Lebanon Cemetery. And his mother became another very good friend of my mother's. She was from Nashville.
Bill Hay, I've seen him in the correspondence a lot in
Bill
the 30s
Hay
and
was the
40s.
director of the parks in the early incarnation. And the Poe, what was his name, was the Commissioner of Conservation.
Poe?
Poe, P-O-E. You'll run across that name somewhere.
Yeah, I've seen it, but I can't remember his first name offhand.
That's some of the
Yeah.
friends. They had twin sons,
Yeah.
and they used to come out here and stay with us for a week or two during the summer. They were wild. Have you ever known twins? They're crazy.
Yeah, they can be. Yep.
Yeah. I hope you're not a twin.
No, I'm not. I'm an only child. No.
Twins are crazy.
Now let me ask you, Mr. Ricketts. Like now your mom worked year-round out here, right? Doing rec activities. Did they do rec activities in the fall and winter, or was that
In the winter,
sometimes?
she would do weekend type craft
Weekend
activities
stuff.
with people. And of course, the big thing in the winter
more
was
inside stuff? right?
inside. Big thing in the winter was the square dance on Saturday.
Sure. Okay.
And then it was recoup time because the maintenance staff would start putting stuff back together that had gotten pretty well banged up
After the
during
season.
summer.
Okay. Yeah.
The maintenance on the pool. We built the addition on the, in fact, some of the pictures I gave Buddy are the building of that addition on the bathhouse. When that bathhouse was built, the little office area in the middle, which handled the baskets for the swimmers, could handle, I think, 150. I think there were 75 cubby holes. What I'm talking about are these little baskets that you put your clothes in when you go swimming.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You get a basket, you get a ID tag with a number that you keep on your wrist or leg while you swim, and you put your clothes in this little, and there were 75 slots. Well, we would have 300 and 400 people on a weekend, and we would encourage people to share baskets. and what have you. They decided the only answer is to, so we extended that office area out another 12 or 15 feet and doubled the capacity of the storage area for swimmers.
Okay.
And I think if I remember, in some of her reports, there'll be the statistics on how many people they had, but I can remember on some weekends, 4th of July, we would have more than 400 people in that pool.
Wow.
When I was working as a lifeguard, I remember that on weekends, they're not all in the pool at once, of course. A lot of it is people sunbathing on the lawn area, but the pool would just be filled with people and trying to keep up with who was where. But in all my lifeguards, I only had to save one person. He's still alive in Lebanon. I haven't looked him up. Alfred Adams did a backflip off of the diving board and hit his head and knocked himself out.
Oh, jeez. He was in the pool, out cold.
Yeah, you stand on the pool. You know what I'm talking about. You jump backwards and he came down on the board.
Oh.
So I had to pull him out of the pool. The field said you ever saved him. I said, this is the only person I ever saved was someone who knocked himself out. I never had anyone drown.
That's good.
Knocked himself out.
Yeah.
They tore down the tower because it was not safe. It was 10 feet tall, and that pool was only 30 by 80 feet.
The diving tower.
The diving tower. It's in that picture. And they put 2 diving boards on.
Okay.
And then we put a much more modern lifeguard stand there that you could leap into the pool from, but I never had to do that.
Right. Right. Okay.
The picture that we have where I'm doing the lifeguarding is that old primitive thing that looks like it was built by Rube Goldberg.
The tower, the first tower,
He was a cartoon guy who used to do elaborate things that were jerry-rigged.
I haven't heard of him. No. So it was a really primitive lifeguard tower then, right? And that's the first.
If we look at the pictures, you'll see
Okay, yeah, we can do that. If you want to do that, we can do that.
The blame. So not to spank me, I'll come down. You have to promise that you're not going to spank me. Because if you don't, I'm with John. Well, that must have scared her, so she says, I won't punish you. And she never did.
And that's your mother said that? So you and Dick, you and, who? I'm sorry, who's
the nephew? Walter Johnson's nephew.
Walter Johnson's nephew are up on the...
Up in this fire lookout.
On the water tower fire lookout up over, just right over here where the Cedar Forest Trail is.
What they ultimately did was take farm fencing and make a safeguard around the ladder that goes up there. And also around that thing to keep people from doing what we did. But that was after that had happened.
So got in a little mischief then, right?
Well, that was just a few of the things I guess.
But that would be fun to go up there. That would be,
As a child growing up here, I had a lot of people looking after me. You see, the rangers used to, I would overhear the conversations when I was out on my own. And Dick was good about establishing limits for what you can do and what you couldn't do. But it's also the discussion among the staff, this, the mother hen's chick's going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of people looking after me.
Yeah. So what we were talking about before was your mom. You were saying she had an excellent relationship with Walter Johnson, great working relationship, and Walter Johnson increasingly put more responsibilities on her in the office, and
that's really how she sort of migrated from just handling recreational activities to administrative work.
Administrative work as the hostess. So they added the park hostess title. Basically, that applied to the additional administrative duties. And then after Walter left, she didn't want to go to Natchez Trace because she liked it here, right?
She liked it here, and I don't know what the politics that were involved were, but she managed somehow or other to convince the management in Nashville that she would prefer to stay here at Cedars. And Mr. Anderson came here as the second superintendent, and they got along well together. Emmett came, they got along well together.
And Lewis was a second father to her,
and
to you.
To me, he really was.
Yeah.
In fact, the road which is now the main road was the tool shed road. and Haber Vickers owned the land that's now been acquired over there, and the development over there, that, what's it called, Shadow?
Yeah, the subdivision, Shadow something. Yeah.
That's the old Haber Vickers farm.
Vickers farm.
We could not hunt on the park or in the forest, but Mr. Anderson used to lend me his shotgun, and he got permission from Haber Vickers for me to hunt in the woodlands over here. So I'd go over there and hunt squirrel and rabbit and the obvious things that you're going to do if you live in the woods. And it's nothing better, by the way, than barbecued squirrel. Rabbit, I'm not so fine.
Yeah.
But
so when Lewis went to the service, he was called.
Service. It was probably around 42, because when the war started, let's see, 1941 December. Yeah, it would have been 42 that he was called to active duty.
And that's when your mom kind of acted as became acting.
No, Emmett Guy came here at that point as the superintendent. He had been at Chickasaw, but Emmett, I don't know how long he stayed here. He was not here for a long period because they went back to Chickasaw, I think. Emmett eventually became the mayor of Jackson.
Okay.
He left the Park Service.
Okay.
I'm going to, somewhere also in that time frame, because it's relevant to our history,
Sure.
Buck Allison was hired by the Park Service as a recreational coordinator. And he's the one who taught me to shoot the bow and arrow. Very active in organizing the Cedars of Lebanon Archers. And there's a picture I gave Buddy of the archery club. We had the state tournament here in 41.
The archery, yeah.
And I think my mother probably did not get along as well as other people, because it eventually became a source of some disagreement. When he came back from the service, he went into the CBs, by the way, during the war.
Buck did?
Buck did. When he came back here, and he wanted to be the superintendent. Well, my mother had been running the park.
Yeah, she was acting superintendent, right?
And Mr. Anderson came back from the service. And there was a period of time when Mr. Anderson was here, Buck was here, and she was here. And they eventually did give Buck Montgomery Bell. So he became the superintendent at Montgomery Bell. But whatever residual disagreements they must have had flared up, because when he became the reason we left here in 48, when he became the director of the park system in 48,
Buck did.
The first thing he did was reassign my mother to Standing Stone. And we moved. And I know that move was not voluntary on her part, although she accepted it, because that was it. Your job is to go to Standing Stone.
Yeah. And Buck was in Nashville at the time?
Buck at that point had become the director of state parks.
Okay, so what he says you do, basically.
Yeah, he was the boss. And that has to have transpired within that period of time.
Yeah.
Buck ultimately also left the Park Service and he did had the landscaping contract with the James Robertson Parkway.
Oh, okay.
Around when they redid the slums in Nashville. He was a great politician. I like Buck and Camille, and Bunny was his wife. Camille was their daughter. I think Camille still lives in Nashville. I have not I haven't even tried to find her since I came back down here. I don't know who she married. But Buck Allison was never a superintendent at Cedars. He was his first job his first superintendent's job was at Montgomery Bell.
Okay.
But at that point, Mr. Anderson came back from the service, and he again resumed the job as superintendent here. And then he left the Park Service and went to work in Corinth for some firm, I never have known what. But eventually went back into the service. and we used to keep up with him until he passed away not so many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up with NASA at Huntsville, but
Okay.
irrelevant. Except
When your mom was acting superintendent.
I'm digressing, aren't I?
No, that's okay. No, that's
acting
no.
superintendent.
That's okay.
Mr. Robinson was the first acting superintendent,
Mm-hmm.
and he became very sick with measles and couldn't do the job any longer. They offered the job to Dick, but he didn't want it, and my mother became the acting superintendent here, and that's the job that she had, or the function that she fulfilled until Mr. Anderson came back from the service in 40, probably late 45, whenever he was discharged from active duty.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly. The record will show you based on who was here when.
Yeah.
But he was here from 45, 46 or so.
I think it was. I'm seeing here June 26 of June 1947. There was a memorandum from Mr. Allison to several parks saying Lewis Anderson's resignation was effective June 26.
Okay,
so
that's when he went to work in Corinth. Yeah, and
Okay.
that would be when Buck was already in the central office.
Okay.
Yeah. That would be 47.
Okay.
That makes sense because we moved to Standing Stone in 48, the summer of 48.
Yeah, and
Which, ironically, I had been going to school sporadically, first at Murfreesboro, first at Cumberland,
University. Yeah.
back over to Murfreesboro, and then when we transferred to Standing Stone, I finished up at Tech. I did my last 2 years at Tech.
Tennessee Tech. Cook.
And that, then I went away to the service, and I really never came back to Tennessee after 51.
After that, okay. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, so you basically bounced around wherever your mom went, you went, and now Buck Allison, was he a park ranger here when your mom was here?
He came here as the recreational, and he was here for, this is my understanding from her narration of their relationship. He was hired in that 39 time frame, and he came here for her to train as the recreational director. I think that may be why they never got along too well together. But Buck's original, he was from Nebraska, and he had been hired by the state because the parks were expanding, and they wanted, she had done a good job here of establishing a presence in the local community. They don't do what, they really should revive that program, in my opinion, Sean. At least 2 or 3 times a month, she went to the local Rotary, the local Lions, to the local church groups. She went to the home demonstration clubs, and she made a little short 15 or 20-minute presentation on what was available at the park for them to do. And they would come for their picnics, for their community outings. She would go to some of the schools and suggest that they have their graduation picnics here. Like Castle Heights was a functioning military prep school in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And they would bring all of the cadets out here in the spring for a big outing where they go swimming, play ball, have a big picnic at the end of the school year.
Mm-hmm.
If the parks encourage that, they probably feel they get enough people coming in here to use the parks just sporadically, but there's not as much, the lodge was never closed. It was open from 8 in the morning until 10 at night.
There was always someone staffing it.
There was always there. Yeah. It had ping pong tables, it had shuffleboard equipment, it had the jukebox for dancing. It had, this little sunroom had been set up as a concession so that they sold pop and ice cream and stuff.
Yeah.
There also used to be a little building between the bath and the lodge that was used as a concession.
A concession building? Yeah, I don't think it's there anymore, is it?
It's gone.
No, it's gone. So she went out into, one of her duties as recreation leader here was to get out into the community
to
as
go
well.
out into the community
Okay.
and
and talk about what's available here. But did she also organize recreation activities at these different sites in the community too?
No, just for them here.
For them here, okay.
And at that time, originally when the WPA first set this up, a lot of the procedures were really established within the umbrella of the WPA recreational programs.
Mm-hmm.
The directors from each of these little towns would bring groups here. And then I know once or twice they would have big seminars here
mm-hmm.
where they would train these people that were going to go out and conduct craft classes. The weaving is a byproduct of that, by the way. The loom here, which you've seen up at
the office. Right.
One of the old cabins, I don't remember which one, that was being torn down out here in the park,
mm-hmm.
had the remnants of a spinning wheel and a loom that we found here. And they were not usable because they were decayed and incomplete as far as parts.
Mm-hmm.
But together with the staff here, she got them to duplicate that loom. That loom is made of cedar as a reproduction of the loom that we found in one of the old cabins.
Yeah, one of the old houses. People, somebody who had to leave
on the land that had been acquired.
Acquired, okay.
And it was put together. We had a commercial loom here at the time also that had come. Do you remember the youth program that was a part of the WPA in NY something?
CC
National Youth something.
Nationally, okay.
I forget the name of it, but
mm-hmm.
they had encouraged. That's where the craft aspects of the operation came from, and they had encouraged people learning to weave, and we salvaged some of those parts for the pieces we didn't have in this loom, and that's where the metal.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the name of those that hold the threads.
Oh, yeah.
But at any rate,
so that was one thing she did, was to recreate
that, because that was a native craft that
mm-hmm.
they were trying to revive,
mm-hmm.
and they used to have classes here for people to come out, and I regret that we never saved any of the rugs that we ever produced. You bought the looper clips from the sock factory.
Mm-hmm.
They trimmed the top off of the socks,
mm-hmm.
and you looped the looper clips together, and you
mm-hmm.
made these old-fashioned rugs that you buy today
mm-hmm.
are made that way. But that's where that loom came from.
The loom in the office was the one she made?
The ones that Julius Robinson and Dick and Earl Sloan, all of the Rangers at that time, sort of as a group, reproduced that over here at the tool shed. The tool shed is still intact over there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was one, crafts and...
But the emphasis on crafts.
Right.
And of course they did a lot of other things. They found an old still out here in the park, and she conned the county sheriff's office out of the copper so that we could cut it up and do trays and things out of it. You beat copper,
mm-hmm.
make trays.
Make trays out of the copper?
Copper, make jewelry.
Yeah.
You wind it around stones as you're polished and
mm-hmm.
make earrings and stuff. That was another one of the projects I remember.
So, okay.
I think my sister may have a copper tray. I don't have any of these things as souvenirs.
Oh,
but
that would be beautiful to see. Yeah.
But I remembered them. I'm sure that's not the only still that was functioning out here in the woods. But
I've heard.
But that's the one that provided copper for the crafts. And of course, we made our own bows. That's one thing I have to credit Buck Allison for. He taught me how to make a bow, and I still have the two that I made.
A bow? Bow, yeah. For archer.
The year that we did the state tournament here, I won the junior championship. My big claim to fame.
1941, right?
Yeah. And I still have that bow, and some of the arrows, and I made a rack out of the arrows.
So you were a pretty good shot then, huh?
Did I dig with the bow? I killed a rabbit once with a bow. I never was able to kill a squirrel.
Yeah.
But
so she she had to go out into the community. Did she go to places like schools and Cumberland
schools,
University?
Go to the universities and
library.
But her biggest, most of the time, it was through the civic organizations.
Civic one.
The Rotaries, the Lions, the demonstration clubs, and almost all of those organizations would come here for picnics and things of that sort. The Ward Center in Lebanon, which is a really great, have you been to the Wilson County Fair?
No, I haven't, but I will be going next week, I think. So
yeah, we're going from Del Webb. It's the best county fair in the state.
Mm-hmm.
Well, James Ward Center, his name. She worked a lot with Mr. Ward.
Mm-hmm.
He was the county agent at that time, and again, part of the New Deal programs that throughout the country, the agriculture department had organized county agents to try to improve the farming techniques and knowledge that the farmers needed to make a living from the land, mm-hmm. how to improve their ability to manage herds and so forth. And of course, Wilson County was doing very well. The northern part of the county is really doing very well because it had better land as a cattle and sheep grazing. But I remember that she worked through the county agents a lot, which was another part of what publicized the park and made people aware of mm-hmm. what it was about. Mm-hmm. Now, also, if you've gone through your history, Dixon Merritt, who has some plaques that honor him over here at the Nature Center, had been very influential in getting the government involved here in the earliest period of the park's development during the Reconstruction finance era. Mm-hmm. But by the time we came here, Mr. Merritt had moved on. He was working in Nashville at the paper. But later he taught journalism at Cumberland University. And when I was going to Cumberland, I went to school there. I took a semester of journalism from Mr. Merritt. Mm-hmm. And we used to talk about what had happened here at the park, because he was a person who had been very influential in getting the federal government to recognize the need for some effort to preserve the cedars here in that era. Mm-hmm. Now, we had no camping when we came here. We'll touch on that. The nursery was a very big operation here when we first came here. I think they had 5 or 6 people working down there, and the nursery was just a big house mm-hmm. with these tables set up where they propagated the juniper berries. Mm-hmm. And that area, that there's still 1 or 2 rows of cedars that are down there that were never transplanted, but they were still reforesting huge big areas, and you can go out and see where they planted all these cedars today because you can find where they are haphazardly in straight lines. They weren't really that precise, but both campgrounds are in reforested areas. And I'm not sure that was the best way to locate. They cut down an awful lot of cedar trees to put those campgrounds in.
Yeah.
But you can also see how long it takes a cedar to grow, because those cedars in the campground are all just about 60 years old. They're not very big yet.
No.
Because cedars grow slow. Uh-huh. The biggest cedar around here is over in the old Howard house. There was a house over on Richmond Shop Road, mm-hmm. beyond the group camp. Mm-hmm. And there were some big, beautiful oak trees that lightning struck, but there's a beautiful big cedar over there. I told Buddy they ought to clear all the other trees around it away so people could really appreciate what a big
Richmond
cedar
Shop Road, and that's the first growth cedar that was never cut.
That was never cut.
Wow.
It's probably been there since the Howard house was built when they settled.
And Howard's lived over there.
Over there. It's
Okay.
gone. The chimney foundation is still there.
Still there?
That
Okay.
house was still there when I moved here, and children went to school from there. And that whole development on Richmond Shop Road was Tal Major's farm. His farm came back to the back of the, next to Clarence Ingram's farm. His farm came down to where the park goes over to Richmond Shop.
Okay.
Within the local area, of course, there was a class system that existed because the Majors and the Hancocks were the principal families in this part of the county. And they never sold their land to the park. The Hancock farms were intact, and it still is over there, but I think it's recently been broken down into development. Cedar Vine, as a building, going back in local history,
Yeah.
is where Dick Huddleston was born.
Oh,
It's
okay.
the old Huddleston house. Sold to the Denny's. And Leon still lives over there across the street from Cedar Vine.
Cedar Vine, is that the big...
That's the big white house that's been improved and added to. It has the recreational...
It's like a mansion, right?
It's
almost?
a mansion. Has the big recreation hall behind where they have parties and banquets.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Was that a hospital back in the day?
It was used in the Civil War for hospital for the wounded from Stones River battle.
Well, okay. I always wondered about that.
It has a fine history. Now the fellow who's the host over there now tells people when they come there, I've been there to a couple of parties, tells people that it was designed by Strickland, who did the architecture for the... I doubt that that's true, but I think it's probably true that because the courthouse in Lebanon was also designed by Strickland. It's been torn down.
The original, yeah.
The architectural books that were published back in those days were used by people for their building plans. And Strickland did put out a book of building plans. So when you see Bellmead was designed by Strickland, Cedar Vine was designed by Strickland, the courthouse was designed by Strickland. They were based on architectural plans in a book of drawings by Strickland.
Okay.
That's how you get that claim.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, so the Majors didn't have... They were outside the park boundary.
They were outside the park boundary.
And the Hancocks and...
But that's why Major School was on land that they had given to the county. In fact, I think the Majors still have a lien on that land because Alex, I think, refused to sell it. But there were about 5 brothers, and then their children all went to Major School.
Sure.
I was in school with Eula Mae Majors, who was Will Major's daughter.
Okay.
And Reed Hunt Majors was a year ahead of me, and he was Paul Major's son. And in fact, Inez worked here for a good many years, Paul's wife.
Okay. So, yeah, you knew the Majors. They were more of the elite, I guess you would say.
They were the elite families.
Yeah. Okay.
The Hancocks, Homer was the Secretary of Agriculture for the state over here on, we call Chicken Road.
Yeah.
And the Hancock farm is now the subdivision. The Bairds lived over there, and some of the Baird children worked here at the park. Frazier worked here for a while. The Burkitt boys from Miss Annie worked here a while. Thaxton from Murfreesboro. Summer employment here was a pretty good job in the 40s for college students. And I know a little bit of nepotism was at work, but from the time I was 14, I had a job here every summer. I worked as a concessionaire for 2 summers because it was hard to get everybody who's in the service who was able-bodied and able to to go off to fight the
So
war.
they hired younger people.
So they would agree to hire younger people, and so Nelson Forrester from Watertown worked here as the bathhouse attendant, and we had a couple of kids from Nashville that I can remember if I search memory. But William Burkitt was the oldest Berkey boy who worked as a lifeguard here before the war, and William taught me to swim. And some of the pictures we have here are of William down there, and then his younger brother Wilburn worked here as a lifeguard, and Nelson Forrester worked as a bathhouse attendant. Gene Forrester, his older brother, who eventually went to West Point and actually finally made a one-star general based on some interesting politics, which I won't go into. That has nothing to do with the park. We're all summer employees. Lytle Landers, who was instrumental in getting the lodge dedicated to Dick from Shelbyville, worked here a couple of summers.
Okay.
But these were all the summer employees that I worked with, because after I got my junior life savings certificate at 16, I was able to work as a lifeguard then. And then when I became 18 and was upgraded to senior lifesaver.
Senior lifeguard, okay.
I was able to work and I worked as a lifeguard most summers until we moved to Standing Stone in '48, and I worked up there on the lake that last summer.
So you worked, just to review, you worked, now you were born, Mr. Ricketts, at what year?
1927.
1927, so you started working as a concession in the concessions for 2 years, 14 and 15,
14,
and then
15.
at 16 you were old enough to become a lifeguard.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the meantime, hello, buddy.
Hey.
I'm doing a memory dump here, and you're probably going to have to let me edit this tape.
Okay. So yeah, you worked then at 14 and 15 as a concession attendant at that little building between the Nature Center
little
and
building
the
between the Nature Center,
lodge. Yeah.
at the between the Nature Center and the lodge. We also, the first concession when we had the square dances in the lodge was that drop-down window there off of the smaller lounge, which is used for storage now.
Oh, okay.
And the kitchen was still in existence at that time. In fact, let me go back to living in the lodge.
Sure.
It wasn't bad in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
That attic was hot as all get out, but at 10 you don't notice that, and
Yeah.
you didn't go up to go to bed until it was cooled off in the evening anyway. But come wintertime, it was just as cold. So at night, we would take our cots, these were these folding cots, and we would bring them down and put them in that lounge by the fireplace. And then, of course, because the lodge was open to the public in the daytime, we'd fold them all up, put everything back up in the attic. And that went on through the early part of that winter.
So you'd sleep downstairs.
Sleep downstairs, just to get
where the warmth of the fireplace is.
and
Okay.
keep that fire. And during the coldest part of the winter, my mother, you couldn't heat that lodge. She would hang blankets over those arched openings so that we just heated that one room, because it was, you talk about it, now I think they have central heat.
Yeah.
It's just like living here. We heated this whole little cabin. It's not a big space with this fireplace.
Right.
And you learn to keep a fire going all night, and it's
Right.
possible to.
And it probably worked better in some ways than the central heat and air now.
It does, right, comfortable. But at any rate,
Yeah.
with electricity, which TVA had made possible, of course, that was a huge big electric stove in the kitchen. And by running the oven in the kitchen, that kitchen was the warmest room in the lodge. You could heat it by running the oven with the door open. And they tore the wall out between that little tiny square storeroom. What I was going to say is ultimately we moved the cots into that little storeroom because it was room enough for 2 cots in it. But they tore the kitchen out and made that into the park office and did away with the kitchen.
Okay.
This was after we had moved over here, but I just remember that and they built, where the nursery house was, they built that into a quarters for the summer help, and they moved the kitchen equipment down there.
Okay. The kitchen
So,
from the lodge.
From the lodge. Because the lifeguards we all shared that kitchen, and that was another adventure for a 10-year-old. Everybody had a shelf in the refrigerator for their food. The lifeguards did their own cooking. We did our cooking in there.
Mm-hmm.
The Rangers, of course, who lived here, went home for lunch or brought their lunch.
Right.
But the park in the wintertime was essentially very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
It was very busy in the summer. I always remember the two sessions.
Mm-hmm.
The two sessions, you know. It was like living out in an isolated wilderness during the winter. But in the summer, we always had a lot of people.
Right, right. And the lifeguards lived, again, over in the lodge, right?
They lived...
Well,
the first 2 years, they lived in that little room
mm-hmm.
in the nature center, in the bathhouse.
That's okay.
Then when Mr. Anderson felt they needed better quarters, so when the nursery was closed, they remodeled the nursery house into these staff house for the summer help.
Okay.
And they put the kitchen in there, and they had room for the bunks
Mm-hmm.
and a little sitting area down there. And then
Okay.
usually the summer staff was never more than 5 or 6 people. There would be usually 2 or 4 lifeguards. You would work 2 shifts. We could keep the pool open from 10 until 9. So you'd have one lifeguard on duty each shift. On the weekends, you'd have 2 on duty each shift.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd have, and always 1 or 2 concessionaires and 1 or 2 bathhouse attendants.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, a lifeguard that wasn't working as a lifeguard worked as a bathhouse attendant. And I think that's what Ricketts worked out. I call my mother Ricketts, by the way, if you find that reference strange. Early in her career here, I think it started with Jean or Chuck. They started calling her Ma Ricketts.
Yeah.
And everyone soon began to call her Ma Ricketts,
Mm-hmm.
or Ma.
Ma.
She wasn't fond of that nickname.
No? Okay.
And so I picked it up, and I says, Ma Ricketts. And so separately from her, she says, everyone else can call me that, but you are to call me Mother. But that's how she became sort of known locally, and even the Rangers called her Ma.
Ma Ricketts.
Yeah.
Why did they start calling her Ma? Did she just was she like a motherly figure?
A motherly figure to them, you know. All the boys were here working every summer,
Mm-hmm.
and she was the sort of she was establishing their schedules and their routines and all that, but she was also, I guess, a mother figure to them.
Yeah.
And that just, I think it was probably Jean or Jug that they just sort of, okay, Ma, and that just eventually became her name or her nickname.
Yeah.
And so when people talk about Ma Ricketts, you know, locally,
Mm-hmm.
that's where that came from.
Mm-hmm.
And when she went to work later in the office in Nashville,
Mm-hmm.
they still referred to as Ma Ricketts. In fact, a good friend of mine, Mac Pritchard, have you met Mac, the state naturalist?
Mm-hmm.
I just met Mac when I moved back down here again, and he was talking about, because he worked there the last year before she retired,
Mm-hmm.
is when he first came to work as the state naturalist. And he was saying, Ma Ricketts was a legend in the park system.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, how did you come to call her that? He says, everybody called her Ma Ricketts.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where that came from.
So she was really well liked here by everybody.
I think she was well liked.
I mean,
and
she sounded like a
was
wonderful
respected
woman.
by
Yeah.
the staff.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, she didn't really want to retire, and of course the retirement age was not enforced as strictly as it probably would be today. But when she turned 65, I forget who was the governor. I think it was Browning. She had to get a letter written that allowed the parks to continue to employ her, and I believe that was under the Department of Conservation at that point. I think it was under Chappell. A little politics involved, I'm sure, but she kept getting this letter
Mm-hmm.
written so that she could work for another year. And so when she turned 75, and that's the final chapter in her relationship with Buck Allison, because by then he was the director of state parks. And he refused to submit a letter extending her terms of employment and forced her to retire. It was time. Well, he probably was right. By then, trying to be objective, because she was my mother.
Sure.
But as capable as she was, and as efficient as she was, by that stage of life, she was also a very strong, opinionated individual who did not accept orders from anyone. She just did things the way she was going to do them. And I've worked with other people who have been in jobs a little too long, and so I can kind of feel that's what really happened.
Right.
They forced her to retire at 75.
75.
Hard to believe, because today I don't think they would allow one to work that long.
Yeah, I think they start ushering you out earlier now. I mean, you know.
But that was the end of her career with the parks.
Okay. Okay.